The night was black as ink over the waters of Iron Bottom Sound, off Guadalcanal. It was November 15th, 1942. The Japanese believed they owned the night, but in that darkness something new stirred. Imagine a warship firing with perfect accuracy at an enemy it could not even see. Imagine steel shells, each weighing more than a ton, flying through the void guided not by human eyes but by invisible beams of energy. And imagine the pride of Japan, the battleship Kirishima, bursting into flames before her gunners even caught sight of their attacker. In that single hour, the world of naval warfare was turned upside down. The vessel was USS Washington, a fast battleship of the United States Navy. Her weapon was the Mark VIII fire control radar, a system that allowed American gunners to see through night, smoke, and storm. What unfolded that November night was not just another battle. It was the moment when technology leapt decades ahead, and the old masters of the sea realized their advantage had vanished. This story is not only about one ship or one battle. It is about how an entire navy transformed itself in the fires of war. It is about how the United States, within months, built a war machine that Japan could not understand and could never match. And it is about how the Second World War shifted course because of innovation, courage, and the will to survive. Stay with us, because what began in the waters of Guadalcanal would decide the fate of World War II. By the autumn of 1942, the Pacific Ocean had become the largest battlefield in human history. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles, from the jungles of Burma to the islands of the Solomons. The Imperial Japanese Navy had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor, sunk the mighty battleships of Britain in Asian waters, and carried the image of invincibility wherever its flag flew. One of the great pillars of Japanese naval doctrine was night fighting. For 2 decades, their sailors had trained under moonlight and starlight, perfecting the art of gunnery and torpedo attack in darkness. Their rangefinders were considered the finest in the world, their discipline unmatched, their long-lance torpedoes capable of crippling any ship afloat. To Japanese commanders, night was their natural ally. In those hours when the human eye was king, they believed no fleet could match their skill. The United States Navy, reeling from the blow of Pearl Harbor, knew this reputation all too well. American crews had suffered humiliation at Savo Island in August 1942, when Japanese cruisers slipped through the dark and inflicted one of the worst defeats in American naval history. Dozens of ships burned, hundreds of sailors died, and Washington's leaders feared that Guadalcanal, the island so fiercely contested, might be lost. But while Japan perfected the old arts of sight and discipline, America was unlocking a different power. In secret laboratories and shipyards, engineers had brought to life something the Japanese did not believe possible: radar fire control. This was not the simple detection radar that warned of aircraft overhead. This was the Mark VIII, a system that could track an enemy ship 18,000 yards away and feed data into mechanical computers that never tired, never blinked, and never lost their nerve. For Japanese officers like Admiral Nobutake Kondo, the idea was inconceivable. To them, a battleship had to choose. It could either maneuver to save itself or hold a steady course to fire accurately. No ship could do both at once. Yet in November 1942, USS Washington did exactly that. On the night of November 14th into the 15th, Kondo's force approached Iron Bottom Sound with the battleship Kirishima in the lead. She was a veteran of Pearl Harbor, armed with 8 14-inch guns, and crewed by men who believed themselves the finest night fighters in the world. They expected to find American cruisers and destroyers, perhaps a carrier. What they did not expect was a battleship guided by electronic eyes. Washington's radar operators acquired the silhouette of Kirishima long before any human lookouts could confirm it. The ship turned its speed, twisting through the night, while her 16-inch guns held a perfect firing solution. At a range of nearly 9 miles, shells the weight of automobiles screamed across the dark water. Within minutes, Kirishima was struck again and again. Her forward turrets fell silent. Her decks erupted in flames. Her proud hull became a burning wreck, visible for the first time only as she died. For Japan, it was more than the loss of a single ship. It was the shattering of an illusion. The doctrine of night superiority, the belief in the invincibility of their gunnery, crumbled in the face of a machine that turned darkness into daylight. From that night forward, every Japanese sailor knew that the ocean was no longer theirs to command once the sun went down. This was the dawn of a new age in naval war. Technology had rewritten the rules. America was not merely catching up with Japan's experience, it was racing past, building weapons and systems that rendered decades of Japanese training irrelevant. Washington's victory at Iron Bottom Sound was not just tactical, it was symbolic. It declared to the world that the United States could now fight and win on terms entirely its own. The United States Navy did not rely on one miracle ship alone. Behind Washington's triumph stood years of design, experiment, and the most powerful industrial base in the world. Between 1941 and 1944, 3 revolutionary classes of battleships emerged from American shipyards, each one carrying the lessons of war forward and leaving Japanese planners increasingly bewildered. The North Carolina class was the beginning. USS North Carolina and USS Washington displaced more than 44,000 tons fully loaded and could steam at 28 knots, faster than most battleships afloat. They carried 9 16-inch, 45 caliber Mark VI guns as their main battery, enough to smash any opponent. But their true breakthrough lay in their secondary armament, the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun. These weapons, paired with radar fire control, proved astonishing in tests. By 1941, they could hit fast aircraft at altitudes of 12 to 13,000 feet, twice the effective reach of earlier American anti-aircraft guns. What seemed a modest innovation would, in practice, change the balance of air defense at sea. The South Dakota class refined the concept under treaty limits. 4 ships, USS South Dakota, USS Indiana, USS Massachusetts, and USS Alabama, compressed the power of the North Carolinas into 35,000 tons. Their protection scheme included 12 inches of inclined belt armor and 6 inches of deck armor, superior to any rival of their time. Naval historians would later call them the finest treaty battleships ever built. But more important than armor or guns was their philosophy. American engineers designed them not as lone champions but as guardians of a team. They were made to fight inside fast carrier task forces, lending their anti-aircraft umbrella to protect carriers while delivering heavy blows against enemy surface ships. Then came the giants. The Iowa class represented American naval engineering released from all treaty restrictions. USS Iowa, USS New Jersey, USS Missouri, and USS Wisconsin stretched to 887 feet, making them the longest battleships ever constructed. They displaced over 56,000 tons and could steam at 33 knots, fast enough to keep pace with the Essex-class carriers that spearheaded the Pacific offensive. Their 9 16-inch 50 caliber Mark VII guns could hurl shells 23 miles, farther and harder than anything America had fielded before. Speed, not armor, was the priority because these ships were built to run with the carriers, strike with them, and protect them from both sea and sky. Each class built upon the last, but together they revealed a new doctrine. Where Japanese admirals thought of battleships as solitary dueling champions, the Americans forged them into parts of an integrated weapon system. Carriers needed protection, destroyers needed anchors. Together, the fleet needed a shield against the air. The battleships provided it. That shield was most deadly thanks to the variable time fuse, known as the VT fuse. Developed under secrecy rivaling the Manhattan Project, these shells carried tiny radar sets that exploded when aircraft passed nearby. A direct hit was no longer required. Statistics told the story. It took 1,162 conventional 5-inch rounds to bring down one enemy plane. With VT shells, the number fell to just 310. The impact was swift and devastating. At the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942, USS North Carolina escorted USS Enterprise during carrier operations. Her 5-inch batteries opened up as Japanese aircraft attacked. In just 8 minutes, they destroyed between 7 and 14 planes, an astonishing feat that Japanese survivors described as uncanny, almost supernatural. By June 1944, the system had reached its peak. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, 7 fast battleships formed the anti-aircraft corps of Task Force 58, defending 4 carrier task groups. When Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched 473 aircraft in massive waves, the battleships and their escorts responded with radar-directed gunnery, VT-fused shells, and coordinated fighter direction. The result was slaughter. 243 Japanese aircraft fell against the loss of only 15 American planes. Survivors called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, but for Japan it was no joke. It was the collapse of their carrier air arm, destroyed not only by American pilots, but by the invisible shield cast by the fast battleships and their guns. For Japanese intelligence officers, these ships were ghosts. They moved faster than expected, struck harder than believed possible, and resisted identification. Pilots reported battleships appearing where none should be, misjudging their silhouettes and speeds. Old assumptions that enemy battleships could not exceed 21 knots. That night belonged to Japanese eyes. That air power could crack any shield crumbled one by one. The North Carolina, South Dakota, and Iowa classes were not just ships. They were the physical proof that America had remade naval war in its own image, fast, integrated, and above all, technological. They were the foundation upon which victory in the Pacific would be built. The sinking of Kirishima was more than a loss of steel. It was a blow to the spirit of the Imperial Japanese Navy. For decades they had trained to master the night, to rely on sharp eyes and steady nerves. Now, in a single night, those skills had been swept aside by machines that saw without eyes and calculated without pause. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa would later report that American anti-aircraft fire seemed guided by something beyond human. Bursts of shells appeared precisely where his planes were flying, as if the enemy already knew their path. Sailors who once boasted of their night training now muttered about unnatural weapons. Confidence turned to dread. Admiral Minechi Koga, who took command of the combined fleet after Yamamoto's death, confessed that morale was crumbling. His ships were faster on paper, his crews more experienced, yet none of it mattered against radar that pierced darkness and shells that exploded without hitting. Japanese doctrine had taught that skill and courage could offset numbers, but against this new enemy, courage only filled the casualty lists. It was in this despair that the kamikaze was born. By late 1944, commanders recognized that conventional strikes rarely pierced American defenses. Radar picket destroyers detected formations far away, fighter directors vectored interceptors with uncanny accuracy, and VT-fused shells created walls of fire. Out of desperation came the suicide attack. Yet even sacrifice met the cold edge of technology. Records show that only 14% of kamikaze planes reached their targets, and of the ships struck, fewer than 9% actually sank. Heroism could not change arithmetic. While Japanese leaders searched for answers, the Americans leaned on an advantage no admiral could ignore: industry. Between 1937 and 1944, American shipyards launched 24 fast battleships. Electronics companies produced more than 20 million VT fuses. Procurement contracts for radar and electronics soared from $60 million in 1942 to $450 million in 1945. Behind every gun mount and radar screen stood factories, engineers and workers, men and women, white and black, immigrant and native-born, turning raw steel and copper into weapons that reshaped the ocean. Japan had no such reservoir. Their industry, strained by blockade and bombing, could not mass-produce advanced radar or precision electronics. Their best radar sets, introduced in late 1943, could barely detect aircraft. They had nothing like the American Combat Information Center, where radar contacts from many ships were fused into a single, coherent picture. While Japanese ships fought as isolated units, American fleets fought as one mind. The results showed on shore as well. Iowa-class battleships bombarded islands with an accuracy that seemed supernatural. 16-inch shells weighing 1,900 pounds created craters 50 feet across, guided by radar coordinates immune to smoke or fog. Japanese soldiers huddled in bunkers reported that the fire felt mechanical, relentless, inhuman. Concealment no longer worked. The shells found them anyway. Admiral Soemu Toyota, the last commander of the combined fleet, admitted what others would not. Japan could not compete. Their training, their traditions, their courage, all were crushed by a system of war they had failed to imagine. He called it a defeat not just of ships, but of ideas. And so, by the summer of 1945, the end was plain. On September 2nd, aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials signed the surrender. For them, the shame was not only in defeat but in the setting. They surrendered on the deck of a fast battleship, surrounded by the very technology that had undone them. Radar masts loomed above. Fire control directors pointed silently to the horizon. Every steel plate and electronic circuit was a reminder of what Japan had never possessed and never could match. Admiral Minoru Genda, the planner of Pearl Harbor, later admitted what his comrades had whispered. Japan had skill, yes, but America had radar, industry, and numbers. We fought the war of 1941, he said, but America fought the war of 1945. That was the truth revealed in the waters of Iron Bottom Sound. Darkness no longer belonged to Japan. It belonged to the machines of America. And from that night onward, the outcome of the Pacific War was no longer in doubt. The night when USS Washington sank the battleship, Kirishima was more than a clash of steel and fire. It was a turning point. In those dark waters, a new kind of war was born. The Imperial Japanese Navy had trained for 20 years to rule the night, but in a single hour, radar stripped that advantage away. From then on, the Pacific was no longer a battlefield of eyesight and instinct. It was a theater of machines, of radar beams and electronic fuses, of ships fighting not as lone warriors but as parts of one great system. For the sailors of Japan, the realization was bitter. Skills they had honed since youth suddenly meant nothing. For the sailors of America, it was a revelation. Technology, courage, and industry had fused into something unstoppable. Fast battleships, 5-inch guns with variable time fuses, radar-guided fire. Together they created a shield and a sword that no opponent could pierce. And behind every battle stood a nation's will. Factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and San Francisco turned out steel, electronics, and weapons in numbers that seemed impossible. Millions of workers, men and women alike, poured their labor into the war effort. Their hands built the tools that ended the nightmare. That was the true miracle of American strength in World War II. The lesson is clear. Wars are not only decided by courage on the battlefield, but by the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to believe in something greater. Japan fought with the weapons of 1,941. America fought with the weapons of 1,945. That difference shaped the outcome of World War II. Today, as we look back, we remember not just the ships and the guns, but the ideals they carried. Independence, freedom, peace. The men of Washington fought not only to win a battle, but to defend the hope that future generations might live free of tyranny. In the end, World War II was not only a struggle of nations, it was a struggle of visions. And the vision that prevailed was one of unity, innovation, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who refused to surrender.